thank you for being here as part of the Innovation Wednesdays. Um, Today we have just an amazing person, Nick Jordan. We're gonna get it started. Nick, why don't you get us started and tell us, where you're from? Tell us a little bit about your career, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, so I was born in Olean, New York, which I assume is a place that everyone's familiar with on the video right now. Grew up in Olean and Allegheny. Actually moved around to the south as well. Ultimately graduated high school from Allegheny Limestone, which is right down the road, and was a computer science major at St. Bonaventure. So I graduated in 2001, which was sort of the just after the bubble had burst in the original .com boom, and knew from very early in my life that I wanted to do things around technology. I think if you look back at the 80s and what we thought technology was versus today and what technology is, it's a bit different, but really stayed the course and went that path, and my education at Bonaventure and then subsequent experience were a big part of where I am today.
Awesome. And so once, so what happened then? I'll let you just tell your story.
Yeah, I'm long-winded, so I try to pause because I could talk for 3 hours and people would be falling asleep on the other side. But so my senior year at Bonas, I was approached by a local entrepreneur in Olean that was building a business. The business ultimately was called Webgistics and is still around in some forms. But effectively what it was is his family owned warehouse space, and they had actually done work for Cutco in terms of sending out the marketing materials for the Cutco knife program. And his idea was, there's a number of companies that have a bunch of marketing materials and collateral that they need sent, across the world at various times. What if we warehoused all of that material and then gave them an online form, so when they wanted to send it to one of their corporate satellite offices or when they wanted to send it to someone, they could do all of that online. I realize how antiquated this entire conversation sounds. It is the simplest thing in the world. It's like, I want something, I'm going to go online, I'm going to order it. But in 2001, not everything had moved to that model. And so, he was an entrepreneur in the truest form, in that, he had an idea, but didn't really have much more than that. And so he had approached me to say, hey, I'd really like your help in building out the technology to support this business. And I, didn't know anything. I had no work experience. I mean, I worked at a music store prior to doing this. I had taken, 3 years worth of college classes. I had obviously never, run a team or anything, but he effectively hired me to be the CTO. That wasn't what my title was, but it was the person to build out all of the technology to support this business. And when I walked into my first day, it's like, oh, we're already halfway there. We already have a website. And then when someone orders something, it emails, someone in the warehouse, and then they go update the website. They change the inventory from there's 10 of these things, now there's 9 of these things. And so it was not what I would call a very scalable business or technology. And, I was forced to initially by myself, and then after hiring some other Bonas students, we figured out how to, go build a database driven, dynamic, B2B website that allowed them to run that business. And again, I realize that all this sounds very simple at this point, but this is, going on 20 years ago, when there was you couldn't, just search, you couldn't Google anything. Google didn't exist. You kind of had to figure it out on your own. And so it was a really formative experience for me, not, because the technology was amazing or anything like that, but in a lot of ways I was thrown in the deep end. And I had to figure it out. I had no crutch. I had no one I could go to ask questions. Like it was sink or swim. And I think that has really sort of molded my career up to this point, because now I'm very comfortable in situations that are uncomfortable. And I think specifically for entrepreneurship, like that's the job, right? There is no playbook. There is no magic formula. There's no book that you can read and suddenly get all of it. you need to take the best advice from all of the people and resources that you can get, and then go figure out how to make the most of it. And you have to be comfortable being uncomfortable, because 90% of it is being uncomfortable. And I really think without that initial experience, I probably wouldn't, be in a place where I could say that.
I think that the concept of being uncomfortable is something that might resonate with a lot of us right now, and the time that everybody's really going through, and just as part of the entrepreneurship class that a lot of people that are here on this call are part of. We've had to make change and be uncomfortable and make a lot of changes in it, and I think it's interesting. So how did you take that like uncomfortable experience and take it to the next? Like, what'd you do next?
What did I do next? So I really, having grown up in Western New York, which I love, I had a deep desire to go to someplace a little busier, I guess is one way to put it. And so soon after I graduated, I moved to New York City, and by pure luck, no skill whatsoever, as part of my network, I knew someone that was doing some work for the International Olympic Committee. And it was the Olympics that they were having in Greece, which is where the Olympics, the first Olympics were. And as part of the torch relay that they were doing before every Olympic Games, they wanted the torch relay to go through every country the Olympics had ever been in. So normally they would do the torch relay, and it'd be like, it's in LA, and they would run around LA, and then the LA Olympics would happen. But for this one, they wanted to go to France and to Japan and to South America, and it was this logistical challenge. And the person I knew worked at a company that was largely a security company, right? They were the people that had the bodyguards and, would provide the staff around the route itself. But what they couldn't figure out how to do is to take these applications from hundreds of thousands of people that wanted to run with the torch and figure out how to match them up with where on the route they would actually run. And so, they, in their heads, this was an unsolvable problem. They were like, we've got 500,000 people that want to run with the torch, and we have this route that is 3,000 miles long, broken up into 1/10 of a mile increments, and we need to match who's going to run where. Which again sounds like an easy problem on the face of it, but if there's someone in a wheelchair, you can't put them on a gravel road. If there's someone that has if there are parts of the course that are more high profile, you want to put a VIP or a celebrity there. And so they had this very interesting matching problem. And they were like, we've budgeted, millions of dollars to try to figure out how to do this. Can you help point us to someone that can help solve this problem? And in the back of my head, it's like, this is a pretty easy problem, right? Like you set up a bunch of rules. If, X, then Y, or if Z, then not, X. And so I basically did consulting for them, and I was like, I'll create this thing. And so myself and actually another Bonas grad that I worked with created, what was the back end system that supported the Olympic torch relay in that year. And again, part of it was from, I had already worked, at a company where I didn't know what I was doing. So I was very comfortable saying, I don't really know how to do this, but I guess I'll figure it out on the way. And so we did it, and we did it really quickly, and we probably charged way too much for the actual amount of work that we did. I will say the one business lesson that we learned is we decided to put out a press release that said that we were the company, we were the people that powered the Olympic torch relay. And if anyone knows anything about the International Olympic Committee, is that they're pretty protective over their IP and their brand and all of those things. And so we very quickly got a cease and desist from the International Olympic Committee, but it was sort of a good second experience. It allowed me to move to New York. It gave me, enough money to live there and have a fun life in my early 20s. But again, I think it reinforced I had not the first idea what I was doing, but I figured it out and made it happen.
So did you, so a couple questions. So the concept of just, getting in there and figuring it out, obviously you learned that from a previous experience. programming in general is lends itself to that concept.
Mm-hmm.
You agree with that? Like, is that something that you sort of picked up at Bonaventure or before then or after that? Um,
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a combination of things. I think you, in some ways, have to be a little bit hardwired to do it. I mean, I think there are certain personality types, like their entrepreneurship and sort of going into the unknown is not for everyone. And so, I think there's a portion of it that's that. But I don't think it's entirely that. Like, it's not like there's people that are also hardwired to just be like, I'm going to throw caution to the wind and do whatever I want. I think there's a muscle there that you have to work. And to this day, I mean, I could argue that for the last 20 years, I've been putting myself in uncomfortable situations, and there are times when I don't want to be in uncomfortable situations. There's times when I say to myself, "Why am I doing this?" Like there is a version of my life that is much easier and has much less uncertainty, and you know, in those times pass. Like entrepreneurs are human and they have to sort of talk themselves through the hard times. And for me, it's largely the feeling that you get, the reward that you get of saying, hey, I took a blank piece of paper. I took something where I didn't know what the answer was. It wasn't predetermined. It wasn't easy, and made it happen. And I did. You don't always create the perfect version. You don't always create the best version. You don't even usually create a good version sometimes. But it's almost a form of creative expression to be able to go from idea or uncertainty to to creating something.
yeah, that's interesting. So, all right, so jumping back to your, I'm jumping around a little bit, but jumping back to the the International Olympic Committee sends you a cease and desist. Did you get business from that
No.
press release?
No, we had no idea what we were doing. We had no, like, again, I was 23, 24 at the time. We had no idea what it was to run a business. Like, we lucked into this contract, and this contract was very lucrative. And I think we did a good job. And then we did a dumb thing by putting out the press release, but we didn't know anything about sales. We didn't know, it was luck had sort of carried us. The skill that we had was delivering, what we promised that we would deliver. The luck was sort of getting, the business, finding people that wanted to work with us. But at some point that ran out. And I think, looking back on it, we just assumed that, we would luck into another deal and another deal and another deal. And
Mm-hmm.
we didn't know anything about marketing. We didn't know anything about sales. Didn't know anything about finance. I hadn't taken any of those classes at Bonaventure. It was literally, accelerators and all of these other things didn't exist. And so no, we were massive failures by one measure, in that we couldn't continue doing what we were doing. But we're big successes on the other measure, in that we got the International Olympic Committee to pay a ton of money for us to develop something that was actually impactful for the Olympics of all things, to a couple of people in their early 20s that literally had no idea what they were doing.
Yeah. So all right, so then where'd you take it?
So, when I looked at what we were doing, what I had done with the IOC and what I had done at Webgistics, it was almost a consulting job. I mean, it was really, people had a problem, they didn't know how to solve it. They brought me in and I solved it. And yes, they were full time, but largely I was trying to, help people through projects that they didn't know how to solve for. And so I realized at some point that I wasn't going to be able to feed myself if I was in charge of doing sales. And so I had to go find a real job. And so I started talking to consulting companies. And when I say consulting companies, I'm not talking about the big consulting companies, the McKinseys or the Bains or the Ernst and Youngs or whatever. It was more sort of niche consulting company. So I worked for a company called Bay Dynamics. It was based in San Francisco. I worked in the New York office originally, and they were, and again, this is going to date myself. Their specialty was helping people put web analytics tools on their website so they could understand how many people were going to their website every day. And I mean, it was literally, it was kind of a fun job. So they were doing consulting for a company that was called Web Trends, which was one of the leaders in web analytics decades ago. But because I was a consulting job, I would get an email every other week, and it would say engagement letter or something. And it was a Word document that had the client and where how long the engagement was going to be and what their objectives were and all of these things. And every time I would get it, it would be like Christmas morning, because I was like, oh, where do I get to fly to? Like, what are the interesting places I'm going to get to see? And they were very rarely interesting places. Appleton, Wisconsin, lovely place. Don't ever need to go back there again. I wasn't getting the primo the primo spots, but what was good about the job is I would go on these 2 to 4 week engagements where I would be embedded with a company, with a new set of problems and a new set of things that they cared about, and I would help them figure it out. And again, what we were building was like, they would, how many hits do you have on your website? It was not that much more complicated than that, but it gave me sort of a broader view of how different businesses think and what how different departments interact with each other. And so it was it was in some ways as good as an MBA, because I got to go spend time with dozens of Fortune 1000 companies and actually work within those companies and got a broad perspective of how the corporate world worked.
That's consulting is such a amazing learning experience, right? That's interesting.
If nothing else, I learned how to game all of the frequent flyer programs from both flying and staying at hotels. So to this day, Delta and Marriott are literally for 20 years straight, because once you get hooked to one of those programs, you don't ever go off them.
That's funny. So how did you make it from there to narrative? Like, tell us that story.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've had a lot of jobs. I think there was a time and place where staying at one job for decades was sort of valued, and if you did a lot of job hopping, it was sort of seen as a red flag. I think that has changed in a lot of ways in sort of modern corporate America. So I was in New York for Bay Dynamics. I moved out to San Francisco and continued working for Bay Dynamics. It's kind of nice about consulting jobs. It doesn't matter where you live, because you're always on the road anyways. You can literally live anywhere. I don't know why I chose the 2 most expensive cities in the country when I could have lived in Des Moines or somewhere, but I moved to San Francisco. I then joined an internet company called LookSmart, which in the heyday of the .com was worth multi-billion dollars. By the time I joined them, they were worth not nearly that much. Learned a lot kind of about how internet companies operate. Obviously I had been doing things on the internet, but the Silicon Valley and what happens in the Bay Area is sort of a very different animal. At least it was 15, 20 years ago. I think it's, the information age has been much more democratized across the world at this point. Was there for a couple of years. Then I ended up at Yahoo. Not during Yahoo's heyday, but not during the Yahoo of today, where you're seen as a Luddite if you use Yahoo for anything other than maybe Yahoo Fantasy Football. The interesting thing about Yahoo is we acquired a bunch of companies while I was there, and I got to be part of a lot of the due diligence teams where we're going in and evaluating the companies and trying to figure out if we actually wanted to buy them. And so I sort of got to sit on that side of the table quite a bit, and I learned a lot about venture capital and how you value companies and enterprise value and all of those things. I then moved back to New York to a company called Demdex, which was a startup. I was employee 15 or 16. It was like, this is going to be my startup experience, ignoring the early stuff that I did, which I think sort of predates maybe even the term startup. Was super excited. Got a call 45 days after I joined that we just accepted a term sheet to be acquired by Adobe. And so spent most of my time in the Adobe offices on the other side of the acquisition table, trying to convince them that they wanted to buy us and how much they wanted to pay for us. Spent a couple of years at Adobe, then went to a company they called TapAd, which was ultimately acquired for $300 million. I was on the management team there. And it was my time at TapAd that really gave me the inspiration for narrative. So TapAd without getting too far into the details, had a fairly large data science team. And those data scientists were always looking for more data to help feed their machine learning and their artificial intelligence, right? They're scientists in the true form, where they would have a hypothesis that said, hey, if I had this data, I could predict this outcome. Go find me that data. And that was a very hard thing to do. When a data scientist says, go find anything, really, it's rarely easy. And then on the flip side of that, we would actually sell the outcome of their machine learning models, which was a form of selling data, which also very hard to do in practice. And so I actually, kind of looked at the problem and said, hey, I have a problem here. Certainly someone has solved this problem. And I spent 6 months looking for companies, solutions, people, anyone that could help me solve these problems that I was having. And none of them checked all of my boxes, which was, unfortunate. And so, the second step in the process was, okay, how would I solve this problem? If given a blank piece of paper and the problem that I'm experiencing, how, is it solvable? Could I solve it? How would I solve it? And spent, another couple, 3 to 6 months doing that, and really convinced myself that I thought I had an idea that had legs and that I was passionate about. And then once I did that, really decided to go all in and really start the company, to take this problem that I had identified that I thought we had a solution for, and then go build a business around it.
So you were tell me the name of the company again.
Tapad, TAPAD.
So
I do have a penchant for working for companies with dumb names. So I don't know what that says about me, but.
So just to rewind a little bit. So what was your role there at Tapad?
So I ran, my official title was the Senior Vice President of Product and Strategy.
Okay.
Don't trust anyone with strategy in their title, for what it's worth, because it doesn't mean anything. It was primarily a product management role, meaning I was trying to help them design new products and new features that they could bring to market and build a business around.
Okay, can you explain the word design in that context?
Yeah, it's not visual design, it's not graphic design. It is more systems design, I guess. So you take a problem, a problem that you're trying to solve, and you look at, what are the inputs that you have to that problem, be it, in a physical world, if you're developing widgets, like what is your supply chain, where do you get the raw materials, et cetera, et cetera. In a digital world, it tends to be, what is the information that we have, what are the resources we have, what are the skill sets we have. You take what you want the results to be, the outcomes that you're trying to drive, the solution to the problem, and then it's really sort of figuring out everything that goes in between those things. How do you take the raw materials you have, in whatever form they might be? How do you take the results that you want to create in whatever they might be? And how do you build the machine in the middle that does that the most effectively, efficiently, user-friendly? And so you're really designing a system that you can ultimately, hopefully, go, sell to someone.
So in a sense, you're creating a business inside of a business, and you're sort of a business startup.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard product management described as, it's kind of the CEO that's not the CEO. I actually think I subscribed to that theory when I was a product manager. I think now that I'm a CEO, I realized that, the product is a core component of what you're doing. Like, if you look at any great company, old or new, right? Coca-Cola, their product is, Coke. If Coke tasted like crap, none of the other stuff they did would matter. It really wouldn't. You look at a company like Uber, they make it really easy to get from point A to point B. Actually, my family is still in the Olean area. My mom discovered Instacart throughout this crisis, and she's like, I put in what I want. Someone shows up at the grocery store. They bring it to my house. It's there in 45 minutes. It's the best thing in the world, right? They solved. Instacart had a product that solved a problem, but I will say that, a great product that nobody knows about is not a great business. A great product that no one can go sell, not a great business. A great product that where the customers have trouble, getting support and understanding how to use the products, like not a successful business. And so while yes, I do believe, product for, the vast majority of businesses that aren't services businesses, the product is the key. It really does take a village. And it really takes, sort of all of those different functional areas to really make a successful business.
Got it. And then to jump around even more, so when you're at Yahoo and at some of these other companies, were you were you in product management? And I know you said you were doing some due diligence and stuff like that. Um, is that kind of where your career took you? Like, just from a high level, and you don't have to dig too deep, but
Yeah, I wasn't a product manager at Yahoo. I think I did a lot of product functions, but that was not my title. I was not in the product management organization.
mhm.
I mean, other than being comfortable, being uncomfortable, I think the other thing that, I'm very lucky is that, my formal training is a computer scientist. Like I can sit down with the nerdiest of nerds and nerd out. Like I'm one of them. Like, and I do it and I love it and I'm passionate about it. But I can also go talk to a CFO or a CEO or someone, a head of sales, and really understand what motivates them, what drives them, the problems they're trying to solve. And so, I've often thought of product as sort of the cross section between where the technology and the business meet. Which, for technology companies, for sure, it's slightly different for companies that aren't technology companies.
Mhm.
And so while I was not a product manager by title, I think the fact that I could sort of, I don't know if anyone's seen Office Space or if I'm just dating myself more, but, it's like there's a product manager in the movie and they're trying to figure out if they're going to lay him off. And they're like, well, what is it that you do? And he's like, well, I take the requirements from the customer and I bring it to the engineer. And they're like, well, why can't the customer just bring the requirements directly to the engineer? And he was like, I have people skills. I'm a people person. And, I do think great product managers are really good at taking sort of business problems or customer problems and distilling them in a way that a more technical or solutions oriented team might be able to understand them. And I had that skill set. And so when I went to Demdex from Yahoo, it was to run product management, even though I didn't have that on my resume. I had effectively done some of those roles and it, at least convinced them whether I was, whether it was true or not, that I would be good in that role.
Got it. Interesting. All right. So jumping back to narrative. So now you had found this problem and you decided to create, this problem around data where you're trying to figure out how to even, how to get the data that you're looking for. Right. And so start digging into narrative for us and in sort of the life of narrative. And
yeah, I mean, the life of a startup is it's an interesting thing to think about. I mean, when you start a company, generally you start with absolutely nothing, right? You have an idea and the idea is effectively it. What we were trying to do was basically build a two-sided marketplace, right? We needed people that wanted to buy data and we needed people that wanted to sell data, which is an even more daunting problem. At least if you're creating widgets, right? If I decided that I was going to create the best, beer mug in the world, I could create a beer mug and then I just have to find people that want to buy a beer mug. When you're building a marketplace, you have to find people that want to sell something, and then you have to find people that want to buy something, and you have to find them at the same time to make this thing happen. And so it was very much how do you bring these parties together when you have nothing? Like you're literally barely even a company. Like we, incorporated in Delaware, and that was effectively it. And so you have to look for shortcuts. You have to find ways to hustle. And so the way that we went after it is we basically, I'll give the Cliff Note version of this. We gave software away for free to sellers. We said, hey, we'll give you the software. It'll help you sell your data. You might not sell any data tomorrow or next week or 6 months from now, but you have no risk. You don't owe us anything. We don't own any of your data. Like it is business as usual for you, except for we've given you this free piece of software. And we went and found 30 companies that said yes to that. 30 companies that said, we will take this software for free. We don't know why, we don't really know what it does, but it's free and people like free stuff. And then once we had those 30 sellers on the platform, then we were able to turn over to the buyers and say, hey, we have 30 companies that want to sell data. They're all using our software. It would be much easier for you to work with these companies if you were using our software versus if you try to go do what we just did on your own. And so we created a market by first creating supply where there was no demand. And then once we had enough supply, going to the demand and saying, you'd be crazy to try to do this yourself. We just spent a year, putting together these 30 sellers. Why don't you work with us? And then once you're able to do that, in a perfect world, you end up with this flywheel effect or a network effect where it starts to build on itself, which is what we started to see.
So can you talk a little bit more about those 30 customers, or really like the first 5 customers? How did you convince them? I mean, or how hard was it to convince them? Was there something that, or was it easy?
Well, I had an advantage that I had a very strong network from my time at Demdex and Tapad and Yahoo, right? Had I tried to do this when I was 25, I would have known no one, and I would have, how do you get people to take a meeting with you? Once you get to the meeting, how do you get them to take you seriously? If you like, it's much harder. So to the extent that I had a network from my career up to that point, like you find the people that you already know, that you're friendly with, that trust you, that you trust, and that gets you the first 3 or 4 or 5 of them. And then once you have those 4 or 5, then you turn to the 6 and you say, hey, these 5 other companies are already doing it. Like, they're the proof point that you should be doing this. You don't want to be left out in the cold. And so I there were a lot of structural advantages of me being, 20 years into my career when I started this. And in fact, I think if you go back to, what I did at Webgistics and then the International Olympic Committee, one of the reasons you could say that those, that especially the IOC venture didn't turn into something else is I had no network. I didn't know anyone, and I didn't know how to do sales. And so, I think that was the structural advantage that I had in finding those first customers. And with any business, with anything, you just need to show, a little bit of momentum. And then it's much easier to find other people to hop on board. Now that only brings you so far, right? You got to start showing value at some point. Like you can't just do it because you have friends and people that are willing to take a chance on you. But I do think you do need to find a way, at least initially, to find that catalyst that allows you to jumpstart things. Otherwise, you can sort of be stuck in that zone where I don't have any customers and I don't know how to find any customers, and therefore I'm not going to have any customers. You have to pull some trick out. And it's different for every business and every industry and all of these other things. But it's people aren't going to come to you. You got to find a way to go to them, and you got to find an elegant and convincing way to get them to sign up.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm hearing you say is, I mean, you might not have actually said it, but you had expertise in the area that you were selling into, essentially, and so you knew who to talk to. And you knew how to talk to them, and you had some relationships with them already.
Totally. Now that's not to say that you need those things. I just, those things made the path that I had at Narrative, a lot easier. And in fact, I don't think I personally could have made it work without those things. There are plenty of entrepreneurs, there's plenty of companies that start with nothing, no network, no, a big idea and, a lot of drive to move that forward. I just don't think I don't think that I've got the DNA for that. Like I need some structural advantage. And then once I have it, I'm more than willing to take advantage of it. And luckily for what I was doing, between the expertise and the network, and a little bit of caution, throwing caution to the wind, was able to start the company.
Great. So can you talk about where the company is now? Maybe a little bit about sort of your recent fundraising, that kind of thing, and
Yep.
then maybe we can get into like where it literally is today.
Yeah, totally. So we raised So far in total, we've raised $14 million. So we raised a round of venture funding very early. No product, no customers, no, like literally nothing. Like an idea on a napkin is cliche, we raised $2.5 million. Again, entirely based on my network. There was no, had I not sort of done the other things I'd done in my career and hadn't known a bunch of investors, I would have been laughed out of a bunch of rooms. So I know, again.
Yeah, just to understand that. So you said idea on a napkin. Did you have a pitch deck? Did you make some phone calls and say, we're doing this, we're going for, like, talk a little bit about how that actually happened?
Yeah, so we ultimately developed a pitch deck. If you guys ping me after this, I'll go back and look for it. It is embarrassing, so I will actually not look at it myself, but I'll send it to you and show you what a really crappy pitch deck looks like. And so I knew I had a bunch of structural advantages. I had a very good friend that I'd worked with at Yahoo that had just become a venture capitalist. I don't know, how in the weeds in terms of how venture capital works are, but venture capitalists are looking for what they call deal flow. Like when you're an investor, you want to see as many potential deals as possible because you're only going to invest in, 1 in 100 of them, 1 in 200 of them. And so you just need to have meetings constantly. And so he had become a VC more recently. And so he was just looking for deal flow. And he's like, Nick, you've got an idea? Come on in. And so I met with him and some of his partners, and they introduced me to some other venture firms, but I kind of had an in there, and they ultimately were one of the ones that invested. I had also just worked at a company that had sold for $360 million. And so all of the employees of that company suddenly had bank accounts that were larger than they were before that deal had sold. And so there was a bunch of just friends and family, people that were willing to write $25,000 checks, $50,000 checks because they knew me and they believed in me. And so, I had an idea on a napkin. We turned it into a crappy pitch deck. And then we went out and talked to 200 potential investors and said, here's the idea, here's my background, here's why we think it's going to work, and got the investment. I will say I long for those days because, structural advantages aside, when you're raising money and you don't actually have a business and other than, again, being incorporated, we didn't have a business. There's no proof points. They can't look at the numbers and be like, why didn't your revenue double from, Q1 to Q2? And, why did this customer, churn? Why are they no longer a customer? You have nothing. And so they really have to buy into the story. It's like being a Bills fan. It's like, every season, like the Bills are going to be great. We're going to make the playoffs, going back to the Super Bowl. And then by week 4, you're like, well, that was never going to happen. And I don't know why we thought that. Kind of the same thing is like, you can go tell whatever story that you want. And as long as the story is compelling enough and you have enough gravitas or history of being right, you can get that investment. As you move forward and you ask for investment, suddenly they say, well, why did this customer churn? And why did you only grow 80% from Q2 to Q3, not 120%? But it was largely going out and just selling, right? I've started telling everyone at my company this, like, everyone is always selling in business, and I would even argue in family and everything else. Like, you may not be selling a product where you're trying to get someone to sign a contract, but you're trying to sell someone that your idea is good. You're trying to sell someone that, you should be hired for a job. You're trying to sell someone, that you deserve the desk, in the corner and not the desk that, everyone can see your screen all day long, right? Like you're always trying to convince people and influence people to your point of view. And fundraising is no different. Building a company, all I do all day is sell, whether it's trying to get people to believe in my vision or invest in the company or any number of other things. And that's what early fundraising was just going and selling people that had big bank accounts that they wanted to take a chance on us.
So, if you're open to it, can you break down that initial? You said $2.5 million was how you started your company.
It's 2.5 or 2.25, but yeah, that ballpark.
And like, was there? So you had at least one VC, and then a bunch of friends and family. Like, how many investors were there? Like, ballpark, if you remember.
Yeah, I think there was two institutional investors, two VCs. I think they put in 175 of the 2.5, and the other 750K came from angel investors. The angels, you're probably talking 15 people, right? I mean, like the smallest check was $10,000. The biggest check from an angel investor was $200,000. It skewed much closer to the $10,000 than the $200,000. And actually, there's things I would do different about that entire process if I could do it over. All 15 of those angels sit on our cap table as 15 separate people. And so anytime we need any, investors to vote on anything for new fundraising or changing the corporate charter or any of those things, we have to go chase down 15 people. I probably would have bundled them into a single entity, found sort of a syndicate lead. I will say the one thing that I learned is that if I could do this over again, I would do almost everything differently. But unfortunately, time only moves in one direction, and you kind of have to learn from your mistakes and go forward from there.
Okay, so take us from there to your recent raise.
Well, there was a raise in between. So we raised the $2.5 million with no product, no customers, no employees, no revenue, obviously. We probably made it 2 years with the first 18 months, us still not having any customers or any revenue. Literally 18 months of, someone had, or a group of people had invested $2.5 million in us, and we went 18 months without getting a single dollar in the bank. And this entire time I wasn't taking salary, and we were hiring people, but we were far from a success at that point. I'd say at about the 18-month point, we had gotten all the suppliers on, and then it started becoming easier for us to find the buyers. And so we started to see this inflection point where we were growing from nothing to, growing from nothing to something is not all that impressive, but, we probably went from $0 in revenue a month to $30,000 in revenue a month. So, in the grand scheme of things, a pretty small number when you've got $2.5 million invested in you, but it was consistent, and we were really starting to see a pattern. And so, we weren't successful enough where we could go raise a ton of money. But we also didn't have enough money in the bank. We probably had $300,000 in the bank at that point, and we were burning $80,000 a month. We had like 4 months worth of money in the bank. And so we went and did another fundraise, which we called our seed 2, right? So the original fundraise was our seed round. This was our seed 2 round, where we raised another $3 million. And it was basically on the promise, like, okay, we're farther along than we were before, and our valuation should be higher, and we did get a higher valuation, but we're not, we haven't proven this. Like, this is not a slam dunk. There's a massive amount of inherent risk here. But we found a lead investor, and all of our existing investors on the venture side participated as well, that believed enough that they put more money into the business. And the hope is if we can take the progress we had shown over those 6 months and do it for another 12 months, like then we would be ready to raise, a Series A. And that's what we ultimately did in December of last year. So we raised $8.5 million in December, largely because we had 6x revenue from 2018 to 2019. So we took that, what was admittedly not a huge base from 2018, and we did 6 times more in 2019. And so we felt comfortable that this is not an aberration. This is not us getting lucky. This is not us, just getting friends to pay for something. In 2019 we did gross revenue over $3 million, net revenue right around $1.7 million. Like, that's, it's not the world's most successful venture-backed business by any stretch of the imagination, but that is a real business. And so that's when we started doing the fundraising and ultimately raised the $8.5 million. That is, we haven't even announced it yet. We'll announce it in the next couple of weeks. That was really, intended to, fuel the growth to go from, $1.7 million last year to, $4.5 million this year and $12 million the year after that. The global pandemic has had, something to say about the best laid plans, and we can talk about that a little bit, but it was really, we found bigger investors that really believed in what we're doing and had enough proof points in the business that they were ready to help us accelerate.
Were those most recent investors that you just mentioned, had you been fostering those relationships? How long did it take you to convince them?
Yeah, I'm a bad CEO. Everyone tells you foster those relationships. No one writes a $7 million check, a week after they meet you. I didn't do a very good job at that at all, if I'm being honest. I mean, the challenge. So when we raised our seed two, we were probably 10 people in the company. And so you get done fundraising, you've got money in the bank, and you're not like, oh, I'm going to go, just start cozying up to the people that might invest in us in a year from now. You're like, I got to start running the business. And so I actually did a very bad job of that. Now, now I'm going to completely contradict myself. We started the fundraise the day after Labor Day. So what is that? September 3rd or something of 2019. And we had the term sheet by October 10th. So it was, I don't know if it was lucky. I don't want to ascribe it to any, skill or anything that I did particularly well. But the fundraising process from starting to term sheet was very quick. Like a month is, I think, unless you're Uber, or unless you're a unicorn, is a very, very short period of time. Now, it took us another 2 months to close the deal. Like there was a bunch of negotiation on the term sheet, and the lawyers get involved, and so the whole thing, soup to nuts, took closer to 3.5 or 4 months. But we got it done. But one of the things I'm already doing before we raise money again, if we raise money again, is I am spending a lot more time cultivating those relationships, because the next round is not going to be an $8 million round. It's going to be a $25 million round, or some number that should sound ridiculous to everyone, including myself. And the bar keeps getting raised higher. The business has to keep improving, and I do think that cultivating those relationships makes it easier, certainly.
Yeah, having them follow you and know what you're capable of.
Yeah, although there's some danger to that too, right? Because
Yeah.
if I tell them today, actually, if I told them 6 weeks ago, hey, we're going to do $5 million in revenue in 2020. And then I have a conversation with them a month from now and say, it's actually only going to be $2.8 million. Like I really struggle with this, because even when we were raising our Series A, like if you had no context for what we wanted to do in 2019, like if you just looked at the graph, you'd be like, these guys are killing it, like up and to the right, like exponential growth, like amazing. But if you actually looked at what our plan was walking into 2019 and where we thought we were going to be, we were an abject failure. And so there's almost a danger of expectation setting, right? You want to cultivate those relationships, but you don't want to say, we're going to be a rocket ship and we're going to the moon and we're bringing all of humanity with us. Because then if you only, bring astronauts to the moon with you, which is still very, very impressive, suddenly they're like, hey, I thought you were going to bring all of humanity with you. And so there's a delicate line to walk there, not to set the expectations too high, but also not to just walk in cold and expect someone to give you a ton of money.
Yeah. Okay, so timing wise, you got this last round, it sounds like, at a good time. We're 3 weeks, it's April 1st, 2020. We're 3 weeks into this global, or more into this global pandemic. How has that affected you both personally and your business?
Personally, it's more of an inconvenience for my close family and friends. No one's sick. We're sort of homebound in our Brooklyn home, and there's a lot of scary stuff that's happening in New York. I mean, it's ambulance after ambulance after ambulance, and so it's tough emotionally, but we're certainly safe, which I'm thankful for. On the business front, we talked earlier about being comfortable, being uncomfortable. There's almost been a strange sense of calm that's come over me in this entire thing. I mean, like for whatever reason, like I would have thought, had you told me what was going to happen, that this would cause a lot of anxiety and I would be freaking out, and like all of the natural human emotions you would expect someone to have. But I do think sort of, having a bunch of experience being in uncomfortable situations, I'm uniquely situated to, sort of take this in stride, which I think is good just from a leadership perspective and running a company perspective. That being said, we don't know what the world's going to look like in 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. And the thing that, the worst thing that can happen in business, this is maybe not the worst thing, that's hyperbolic. A very bad thing that happens in business is uncertainty, right? If you're the CFO and you're trying to figure out where you want to spend money, if you know exactly what the world's going to look like in 6 months, you can build a plan. If you have no idea what the world's going to look like in 6 months, you're paralyzed because you don't know what the world's going to look like. How do you plan around uncertainty? And so, I think we will go into recession. It could be a recession that lasts multiple quarters, and that will have an impact on business. The businesses will spend money on the staples, the things that are required, the things that they need to spend money on, and they probably won't do a lot in new areas, new spaces. They won't be investing heavily in certain places. And having a startup that has created a new product, we are a new thing. We are a shiny object. We are not a must buy. And so we have reforecasted all of 2020 and effectively brought our forecast down from close to $5 million in net revenue down to $2.5 million in net revenue, right? We cut our forecast in half. And we implemented a hiring freeze. We said, hey, we're not hiring anyone for at least 3 months and probably 6 months. And on Monday of this week, we actually had to lay off 16% of the workforce. And so, it's been a tough time, certainly. And sort of, the human impact, I can't, underscore enough, right? Like, we didn't lay off employees, we laid off people, and, in a time of pandemic and all of these things that are going on. And so it was a very, very hard decision to make. But the calculus was largely, we have 25 other employees that, I want 9 months from now for them to all be gainfully employed. And so, we had to make decisions to, ensure the longevity of the business and the sustainability of the business. And we actually had an all hands meeting this afternoon where I tried to channel my inner Andrew Cuomo in his press conferences, where it was a very frank discussion. Like, here's where we are, here's why we made the decisions, had we not made the decisions, here were the other ways this could have gone, which were even worse. And this is terrible and no one wants to do this, but unfortunately it's the reality that we live in. And so that's the bad side of it. It's, you never want to do that. If I was a glass half full type of person, I would say, oftentimes the best companies are born out of recessions, right? If we can figure out how to create a sustainable business in this environment over, call it, the next 6 months, then when this all turns around and budgets come back and the economy comes back, we're going to be a racehorse, right? I mean, again, if you can figure out how to live in the toughest conditions, when you have favorable conditions, it's like paradise. Like, it's easy living. And I believe 60% of what I said, and I think 40% of what I said is bullshit, because I think there's survivorship bias, right? You say that because the companies that are still around after recessions, you're like, oh, wow, they built this great business. And but there's a bunch of companies that don't exist at the end of these things. And that's why we were so fortunate to raise the money in December, because we are well capitalized. And I had to explain to employees today that while we have $8.5 million in the bank, we actually have less now, but while we had $8.5 million in the bank, and that sounds like an enormous amount of money, when you have 30 employees and on average they're making, more than $100,000 a year each, that money goes really quickly. And so we had to make some of these tough decisions.
So have you seen, so you reforecast your sales to 50% of what you had forecast before. Have you already seen your sales do that? And, or are you preparing for that? What is the, and how do you, or is that a number that you're just looking at and saying, this is a worst case scenario? Tell us more about that thought process.
Yeah, I think the worst case scenario is probably a lot worse than that, quite frankly. I mean, forecasting any early stage business is not for the faint-hearted. Like, it's just like, I've worked at Yahoo, I've worked at big companies, and you kind of know all the inputs, you kind of know all the outputs, and you can forecast where you're going to be within plus or minus a couple percent pretty easily. At a startup, you don't have enough historical data to really know what you're doing, and there's so many externalities that it's really hard to do. We have the benefit that the majority of our revenue is actually SaaS revenue, meaning that we have customers that are signing annual deals. And so for those customers that are signing annual deals, like they can't cancel on us. Like, they signed a contract for a year. And so we don't rely on month-to-month sales. It's not like, a restaurant where you need someone to come into the restaurant every night. We have someone come in, they sign an annual deal, and they're there. And so we have some predictability to our revenue, which is really good. And so if you assume that of the $1.7 million we did last year, that the vast majority of that is going to stick around for this year, it really just means we're only going to do $800,000 in new sales this year, which is actually a little bit less than what we did in new sales last year. And so, we've already seen some deals that were pretty close to the finish line get put on hold because they lost budgets. And we suspect that we're going to see more of that, but we have no idea. There's a scenario where we don't sell another deal all year. There's another scenario where we convince people that we actually save them money and we go sell a bunch of deals because we've positioned ourselves in a way for what they care about right now, which is conserving cash. There's a couple of strategic deals we have on our radar that on their own could be a couple $1 million a year. Those are big bets. You don't want to put all your money there, because if those don't come through and that's what you need, then you're in trouble. But, I'd say the range of possibilities of the model could be anywhere from revenue is flat from 2019 to 2020 is probably the worst case scenario, to, we could probably still get to $4 million if this crisis, ends sooner rather than later, and we get one of those strategic opportunities in the door.
So do you look at it as a demand and a marketing equation, or are you thinking? I've talked to a lot of entrepreneurs that their businesses they know that they're maybe evaporating or just changing in such a way that they're reinventing or pivoting or whatnot. Are you having those types of thoughts? Maybe not like leaving what your core thing is, but like adding a new product or new service or anything like that?
Yeah. So I right before this, I was having a conversation with one of our board members, and he was like, "How can I help?" And I said, "Well, the first thing we have to do is reduce how much money we're spending. But I think we have that under control. We have a plan. Like, we'll get there." I was like, what I'm really struggling to do is, like, if you take the worst case scenario, if you say we will not sell another deal for the next 6 months, what should we be doing over the next 6 months? Like, we shouldn't be sitting there twiddling our thumbs, presumably. Part of me wishes he had said that, because I could have done that. And I don't think it is a full pivot. And so the question is, like, what are we going to do to the business to set ourselves up for success when this inevitably ends? And I was struggling to figure out, like, what is the right formula of things to do. And actually, I'm gonna pull up the notes, because if you ever start a company and you have board members that you appoint, make them useful, because this is probably the best meeting I've had all week, because it took a lot of things that were in my head and he really helped focus it. And so he's like, I would lay out, 4 or 5 things that you want to do as a business. Number 1 is manage cash burn, which we've already talked about, right? And we'll put our CFO in charge of that. It'll probably take 5 or 10% of my time in a given week, helping her figure out the best way to do that. He goes, the second thing is, like, find wins you can have within the company. They don't need to be massive deals. They don't need to be anything, but from a psychological standpoint, your employees and your potential customers, like, if you can just be out there and say, you're doing a couple of blog posts a week, you're releasing new features and you're marketing those, maybe you give away the product to a couple of people, at least if they'll go do press with you, and it says, okay, Postmates is now a narrative customer, and no one needs to know they didn't pay anything for it. All you get is a press release that says they're a customer, which, again, when you come out of this, builds momentum. And so that's sort of a momentum play. The third area was sort of the retooling. It's like, where are all the things in our business that are broken that we can go fix, right? It's process, it's technology debt, things that we built in the past that if we could do it over again, we would do it over again. It's positioning. Like, how do you start working on some of those things to, really make sure, again, that when you come out of this, you're in a better place. And then the other two were the strategic deals. And, those are like the big bets, and those are largely going to be on my shoulders. I don't want anyone else focusing on those because they're binary. Like, you either win them or you don't win them, and you don't want to put all your eggs in those baskets. And the last one is people. And so how do you make sure that we're taking care of each other as a company, and really, having people feel engaged and like they're part of the team, which I think is important on a human level, but I think it's just as important that, again, as things turn, if you have everyone that has everyone else's back, it just becomes that much easier to go build a successful business when the times become good again.
Yeah, it's a powerful list right there.
Yeah, I mean, lists are easier written down than they are to execute. And so we have a leadership team meeting tomorrow. We're going to walk through some of these things. But yeah, I mean, even if we could do half of those things well, it puts us in a good place going forward.
Excellent. So, I mean, what just a couple of questions to wrap this up. But like, in your sort of current scenario, is there where would you, like, what's your biggest stress right now? Like, what's the thing that you're sort of really trying to figure out? I mean, it's kind of a hard question right at the moment, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's the uncertainty, right? It is the things are outside of our control now. I mean, if I'm being honest, things were always outside of our control. I think you can convince yourself that things are in your control, and if you go work really hard and create something really cool and do all the right things, that it's going to be successful. And that certainly can happen, but that always doesn't happen. But I think beyond that, like, I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm not a virologist. I have no medical background. I'm not a macroeconomist. And so there's a bunch of things that are happening that, will have repercussions for our business that we can't control. And that's hard. I'm comfortable being uncomfortable, but I also like to be uncomfortable in a situation where I can go impact the outcome. And I kind of feel like that's not where we are right now. I think getting through what we did this week with the layoffs was important. It was very stressful. There were very hard decisions that needed to be made, but they ultimately needed to be made. And so, while it will always be, something I look back on with a lot of regret, I did wake up on Tuesday morning with saying, okay, now we can move forward and start doing some of these other things that we ultimately need to do. And so, I told everyone in our all hands meetings today, I am very optimistic about, what we're doing and what our, chances of success are. It is going to be hard. It is always hard. Don't let anyone ever tell you it's easy. It's not. If you're looking for easy, do something else. But we'll get through this, and I'm actually excited to just get back to the day-to-day things of running a business. And there's plenty of stresses there, but there are certainly things that you can work through.
Great. Well, I mean, I don't know if we have time for a few questions, but before we even do that, Nick, like, thank you for taking the time, sitting on the Bonaventure side at this point, like, knowing that we have alumni like yourself out there and as accessible as you've been, and to us and to the community is just awesome. So thank you.
Yeah, and I'm happy to do it. And like I said, if you want to see that original pitch deck, I might have to have a couple glasses of wine before I dig it up, because it is bad. If you want to, I'd even be happy to share, the pitch deck that we did for raising the Series A. Transparency is really something I'm a big believer in, and obviously I'm a big supporter of the Bonaventure community, and so I'm everything from answering questions to providing materials to, if at some point people want move to New York when it's not a war zone, and have look for a job. I'm happy to help in really any way that I can.
Awesome. Thank you. And when you're back in town, make sure you hit us up and stop by.
I will. I will say my mom is very excited that Instacart is in Olean. She is very much a convert. So I'm excited. I'm excited for her. She called me. She's like, "Oh, there's this great app called Instacart. Have you ever heard of it?" And I was like, "Yeah, Mom, I have." But I will hopefully get back to see everyone soon.
Great. Awesome. Are we good? Any other question? Any questions? Do we have time for a couple questions?
You have me as long as you want me. Everyone's like, I'm bored.
I got no. I just told I'm Todd. I met you came at the year you graduated the year I left. I mean, okay. You left the year I came, but Steve Andrionoff and those guys. That was back in computer science back then, and a couple of those guys just retired, by the way. David.
Yeah. I still read the Times Herald online most days, and I got updates when Dr. Harlan passed and Dr. Levine and Dr. Andrionoff retired. I still keep in close touch with a lot of the CS students that I went to school with there, and we don't make it back as often as we'd like to, but I'm pretty up to date with what's going on.
Excellent. Hey, I want to ask you a question about data analytics. You've been in it now for, looks like, looking at your LinkedIn profile, maybe 7-8 years, maybe more than that. So you really got into it before it got, let's call it sexy, before it got hot. Would you talk to the class a little bit about what data analytics is? I mean, I think most people know the basics of it, but why is it important, and what role does your company do? Because I'll tell you this, if you listen to the Pitch Enough, right, these the podcasts, they always say, oh yeah, we'll have data that we can sell to people. And I always wonder, how in the hell are they going to do that, right? So I figure your company is there to help do that. So
yeah. Trump in a press conference the other day was talking about the data around COVID-19, and it was we're trying to find a way to package it as part of our marketing material. Data analytics. I mean, at the end of the day, no matter what you're doing in business, you're trying to answer questions, right? What is the product I should bring to market that'll make me the most money? Why is this customer worth more than this customer, et cetera? And I think historically, like going way back, a lot of that was just done qualitatively. Like, I'll go talk to Bruce, and Bruce will tell me why he uses this product, and then I'll take that, and that's the gospel. And what we found is, one, that doesn't scale. You can't talk to, hundreds of thousands of people and ask them why they do something. And two, people lie, or they don't actually know. Like, if you ask someone why they like Coke versus Pepsi, they'll give you a big, long, convoluted answer, but they won't actually, you won't learn anything from it other than, people think something that may not be true. And so the way I think about data analytics is, if you've got a question that you're asking, or you want something that you want answered, find data that helps support it, and then, figure out how to, slice and dice and aggregate and look at that data to answer, the question that you're looking for. Now, I say all of that with a caveat that I usually tell people that doing any analysis usually, creates more questions than it answers. Like, every time I go to try to answer a question, I think it'll be very straightforward. And so I'll look at some data and I'll say, well, there's something weird about that. Maybe I should look at this data another way. Maybe I should add other data. Maybe I should do another thing. And it just turns into a rat hole of things, because quite frankly, the world is a complicated place, and you're never gonna explain it with data alone. Where narrative sits in that equation is, if you're trying to answer a question and you don't have the data to support it, we make it easy, at least on the buy side, to take additional data and enrich your existing data sets to answer those questions. So if I was the proprietor at the Burton, and I was trying to figure out why some customers, spend $100 a night and other customers only spend $5 a night, all I know is they walked into the Burton. I might know what they bought, a blue light versus a Budweiser. Maybe if they played pool or if they played the jukebox. I might not be able to predict which cohort is going to be the high value one or the low value one on that data alone. But if I could buy data on each of my customers and understand that, do they do their bank, is their credit card an American Express, or is their credit card a Discover card? Maybe that gives me additional signal that lets me predict what's happening. The Burton, I'm going on information from 10 years ago, not taking credit cards, they would never know that themselves, right? But just the fact that someone has an American Express in their wallet might be the thing that helps them predict some behavior. And so, again, the service that we provide is allowing folks to go access data that they don't have endemically and intrinsically, so they can make better business decisions, whatever those decisions might be. I'll give you an example. Warby Parker did some work with us early on, the eyeglass brand. And initially they sold all of their eyeglasses online, but they were starting to open up retail locations. And so they knew where their existing customers lived because they would ship them glasses, right? So they had their mailing address. But they didn't know where they worked. They didn't know anything else about them. They kind of just knew where they lived. And so when they were opening up new retail locations, they really want to understand the commute pattern of their customers. Do they go from Cuba to Olean, or do they go from Cuba to Buffalo, or do they not leave the house at all? And so they bought a bunch of data that basically showed commute patterns of folks in different neighborhoods, and it let them figure out where they were going to sign a lease for their new store, because the difference of putting up a store in a good location and a bad location over a 10-year lease might be a $10 million decision. And so they were willing to spend $25,000, $50,000 buying data to help them make that decision, because they knew in the end it would ultimately, make them an extra $10 million, again, if they made a good decision versus a bad one.
End in a second. I know we got to end in a few minutes, but I want to tell you, at Bonaventure, we recently just had a master's in business analytics approved by the state, so we're proud about that. And also, we're really doing a lot reformulating how we deal with it, because we've always done quant, of course, but we are really sort of refocusing on that. And we actually have, you may know her, Lori Branch, who is the president of the Iroquois Group.
Okay.
She's a big insurance company conglomerate here. She's actually created our Introduction to Analytics course, and it's actually, people like it. So I'll say this to all our students right here, is that analytics is something you got to know about. It's one of those things you cannot not know about. So I'm glad we have somebody like Nick here who's personifying where people are going with it, and he's right here from Allegheny, New York. So
that's right. And insurance is long-standing analytics, right? I mean, actuarial tables, figuring out the likelihood someone's going to die or be in a car accident, or that you're going to have to pay out an insurance claim, is something they've done forever. It's not exactly like a casino that knows the exact odds, but they're basically trying to predict the likelihood of some outcome that's going to cost them money, so they can set the rates the right way. And so insurance companies have been doing this for hundreds of years. And we've actually talked to insurance companies in the developing world where they don't have the skill set, they don't have the same data sets. And so there are companies, I guess this is more loan than it is insurance, but there's companies in Mexico where they don't have a credit score. Right? In Mexico, you can't say, hey, my credit score is 750 and therefore you give me a loan. And so they're using data, they're looking at the websites that people are going to and who they're friends with on Facebook, all opt in, because these people are looking for loans, and they'll actually make the decision on creditworthiness and likelihood to pay back based on that, and not a score that Experian or TransUnion or one of those companies developed. And again, I'm running an insurance company or a bank, and I want to make sure that if I loan out $100, I make it at least more than $100 back. And the best way to do that is look at historic data and make decisions based on it. And that level of sophistication, that level of diligence is really coming to every industry, no matter what you're doing. I mean, I know bars now that are measuring, by the ounce, how much beer is coming out of taps, and then using that for their ordering decisions and their pricing decisions. There's actually a bar in New York that the more demand, the more of a certain type of drink that someone buys, the price actually goes up as a supply and demand curve. And when something's not selling well, the price will go down. There's like a ticker, there's a board where the prices will change almost in real time. And it's a bit of a gimmick. I mean, it's not the best way to run a bar, but there's something to that, right? It's a quantitative way of running a business.
Well, thank you.
Jason Green, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just had a quick question. Since I'm actually in computer science now as a junior, and I had Andrionoff and Levine before they retired, I just was wondering, like, since you're in industry now, like, I know things change really quick in the computer science industry and like kind of your thoughts on where the industries are going as far as like who's hiring for computer science, etc. Any advice maybe?
I mean, everyone's hiring for computer science. I mean, it's even better than when I graduated, where the .com was supposed to be everyone was going to be a computer scientist, and it's clearly grown. But I mean, you should really figure out what you're passionate about, where you want to work. I think there's, what do you like to do? I think there's certain cultural things, like you can go be a computer engineer at a big insurance company. The culture is probably going to be quite a bit different than if you go be an engineer at a startup or at, an internet company, certainly. And so, the way I would think about it is like, figure out what you're passionate about, what you want to do, what geographic area you want to live in, what culture you want. But, there's opportunities all over the place. I'll say my one, and this has certainly changed or certainly has become easier to fix. My one gripe was that, the computer science program when I was there was a very theoretical program, right? There were some programming classes, but there was a lot of like theory of computation and understanding Turing machines and the pumping lemma. I can assure you that no one's ever asked me about the pumping lemma since I took that class and got a 20 on the final out of 100. And so I would say you should make sure that you're sort of honing your practical skills as well. So like getting comfortable with using GitHub, getting comfortable with, just like, programming and being an engineer is not an academic pursuit. It can be. You can be an academic. You could publish papers. You could become the next Dr. Andrianoff if you want to. But I say, it is much more an applied discipline at this point. And, I think you should, there's plenty of resources out there in terms of how to actually take an ability in programming and actually start applying it. And I'd start a project and just, start working on it and treat it as if you're doing it for a job. Because actually, when you go look for a job, if you have, hey, I created this thing and I open sourced it and it's in GitHub and we've got these contributors, and maybe it solves a simple problem. Maybe it solves I was annoyed that, X, Y, and Z happened. And I just built a little thing that made X, Y, and Z more tenable. Like that is, no matter how trivial it might be, will actually go a long way when you're looking for a job.
Okay.
And if you're anything like me, like my day is littered with things that are slight annoyances to me. Like just, why does this thing work this way? Why does, this app do this? And just take one of those annoyances. Like the next time you're annoyed about something, say, okay, this could be a 4-week project where I'm just going to make something that, what it is for me? Zoom meetings, when you hit leave meeting and then it puts up the modal, it says, are you sure you want to leave? Like, that's why I hit the button. I hit the leave meeting button. Mm-hmm. Like literally, if you built a plugin that just actually exited me from the meeting when I hit leave meeting, like I would pay you 99 cents a month for that. And again, it's stupid and it's annoyance. But like, those are the types of things that you can actually get practical experience in and can show off when you are looking for the job.
All right. Awesome. Thank you.
Nick, you're awesome. Thank you so much. And let's talk again soon.
Yeah, totally. I appreciate everyone's time. Have a good night.